Thanks for joining DMG's podcast, Bootstraps in Business. I'm Savannah Jones with Stephen Hodges, and we enjoy speaking with our guests about their careers, especially when they're interesting and fun, like sports and broadcasting, like Mike Barrett has had for many years. But
hopefully interesting.
It is interesting, and it's fun, and longevity is something that doesn't really happen these days, especially in that industry. A lot of people job hop after a couple of years. So first, we want to find out a little bit more about you. Then we want to talk about some of your history in sports, and then the transition and pivot that you made after a pretty lengthy career. So why don't you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Wow. Well, that lengthy pivot continues, which I think it always does. And we'll get to that first, and then we can back up. But that's the question most people have, and that's what I end up talking a lot about is in this market anyway. And I've had to kind of say at times when I've done some things before, if you're outside the area, this doesn't mean much to you, but hopefully the gist of it in the end will. But yeah, with the Trailblazers for 17 years and really around the team for 25, 28 when I first got into radio. So, and grew up around the team, which I'll get into as well with my dad being a basketball coach and going to training camps when I was little. So, but yeah, after the 16 season, Mike Rice was my partner. My first partner was Steve Snapper Jones, who passed a few years ago. And then they moved Mike Rice into the chair, which we can get into more detail on all of that. Mike and I think did, I'm trying to think, 12 or 13 years together. But then after the 16 season, after ironically a season when we were, for the first time really, outside the local area, kind of got some recognition, kind of were ranked high among some of these, whatever they're worth, on websites, on broadcast teams. And so the local media had picked them up, and it was strange that for the first time, it was like, wow, I mean, all of a sudden we're getting some recognition, some notoriety nationally on what we have done here, and our broadcasts were different. They were very authentic, which is what I try to be in everything. And Mike is just Mike. So the authentic thing isn't something you have to force. But yeah, I went in for a meeting after a season, and I am never somebody who is going to be surprised by anything. My goal is to have contingencies and backup plans for everything. Well, nobody really saw this coming. But yeah, they fired Mike and I and Antonio Harvey as well, who was on the radio side. Weird situation, which we can go into in as much detail as you would like. At the end of the day, it was a Paul Allen decision. He grew up in Seattle, learned the game. His Bill Schonely was Kevin Calabro. And so I don't think in the end of the day, it was really anything personal. I think it was Kevin's job probably for years because of his relationship with Paul, and when he wanted it, he could have it. And evidently that's when he said he wanted it. And so, yeah, we each had a year on our contract and we're out. I think with Paul not being in this market and being in Seattle and coming down for games, never probably had as weird as it sounds, never really had his finger on the pulse of this fan base. Maybe didn't understand the disappointment. I don't want to say outrage because I'm telling the story and it sounds like that sounds egotistical, but there was a big pushback by fans and by sponsors and season ticket holders, which was flattering to us, but we were more trying to, much like you would do. I've always imagined if you had and I hate to compare it to this, but if you had a terminal illness and your job turns into making everybody else feel better, that was kind of our role.
Right.
And having flowers on the driveway the day it happened, everything was very humbling and flattering, but I was embarrassed by that because I hated that kind of attention. I hated the attention by it anyway. And now it's been 5 years or so. I don't even know how long it's been, but it's still out in public and still at the store and, whatever. And people will come up all the time and it's great. And I appreciate it very much. The attention is still a weird thing, but as far as that happening, and then it's like with anybody else who runs into a situation like that and gets laid off or gets fired for any reason, what now? And I remember having those, and especially I think in this case, because it was such a specific industry, and only 30 of those jobs in the country. So you don't just go down the street to the next firm and go, hey, are you hiring? So you have to make a decision at that point of, am I going to uproot the family and move. I did have a couple of opportunities. Ironically, I was interviewing, well, not really even that. I was at the location of one of those opportunities when I first met Steven years ago, when he sent me a direct message on Twitter years ago, and it was right.
I was using social media.
Yeah,
I want to point that out.
And it was the funny thing now I'm remembering. I was sitting on a staircase early in the morning when I responded to your message, and also 5 minutes later told them I wasn't interested in moving, and I wasn't interested in the job.
That was another broadcasting
NBA play-by-play. Yeah. It would have been another team and a move, and and I had a couple of other reach outs. I had some stuff from other networks, college, whatnot. And I just decided at that point, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go reinvent myself in another industry. It was just more like, at that point, I just didn't feel like the time was right.
Well, I think honestly, it's more of you got a message from Haji.
And exactly what it was.
You looked at that and you said, I can go back to the NBA.
Or everybody knows this guy.
Everybody knows this guy right here. This is the guy.
This is the move I'm going to make now.
Right. That's how I designed it in my head. I mean, it really...
And part of it, and this is going to sound like, as far as the NBA goes, I don't know that I could work. I don't want to say never. I don't know that I could work for another team. And only because I was a live, breathe, sleep, eat Blazer kid from the time I was tiny. And I was the kid that listened to games under the covers. And, with my dad being a high school coach in the Valley, and he knew Rick Adelman well back in the day. And so we used to come up and got a little bit of access to training camp. And I spent a lot of my early days in the Coliseum running around, knew the building well. And so it would have been very, very weird. Not that I would have felt like I was being disloyal to the fans necessarily, but I don't know. It would have felt really odd to me, and so I just chose not to. And again, I didn't go out hard after anything. I never really tried that. I never had an agent, and most guys, most all of them, I think, do. And I had a couple of agents back, years before this happened. I finally met with one in Atlanta one night on an off night, and he couldn't believe that I didn't have an agent. And what I didn't know then is your contract details are pretty much public knowledge in that circle. So he sat and told me how underpaid I was, how
bad it really was, right? Isn't that a lovely thing to hear?
Right. And I walked away and I told him, I said, I don't want to hear all. I mean, I know it's his job because he's trying to sell his purpose. Mm-hmm. But I was like, I don't need to hear that.
Do you know how bad you screwed up here and here?
Kind of, yeah. Because he was asking about what I did. And I said, well, I write the blog. I write a lot of the game program. I write content for the website. All these things. And he's like, you don't get anything for that. I said, no. But that wasn't what it was about for me. And not to sound altruistic, but it just wasn't my thing. But then to fast forward to that day when I get, that happens. And it was ironic because I walked out after that meeting, and it wasn't with Paul. And I did talk to Chris McGowan right after that, and Chris and I were friends and still are. And I could tell the minute I talked to Chris, this was not their decision. I kind of knew that anyway. But really, after I talked to Chris, I knew that it wasn't his decision. He was really, really feeling bad and knew that he was going to have to die on a hill for this story and knew that he was going to get hung. And so I think he felt that too. And I don't want to overstate that, but I do think that's kind of what happened. By the time I got to I went down and I'm kind of numb, but I'm kind of like, I get to my car and it's already on sports radio. By the time I turned my car on, because they had issued a press release right after I left. So then the phone starts ringing but I'm the voice of Bimart. So I still do all the Bimart commercials. And I only bring that up to say, after that meeting, I was supposed to go do a bunch of Bimart commercials, audio, just go to a studio and do a bunch of reading. And I called Mickey Miles at Capelli Miles in Eugene, who's a friend. And I said, told him what had happened and said, you guys probably don't. This is probably it then. If this goes, that goes. And he said, I always remember, he said, no. He said, we have you because you're Mike Barrett, not because you have anything to do with the Blazers. I only bring that up to say comments like that, and I've told him this, but that's when I went, okay, I'm fine. I'm going to be fine. And, but you don't know that And then getting calls all the rest of that day. I was in my garage where I always was, and I had an old truck, and I'm messing with that, and getting phone calls from peers in the league. And some guys surprised me that they would call me. Like all the big name New York, LA guys called. I got calls from a couple of referees in the NBA. I didn't even know how they would know. It was very humbling. But there are things that stick with you during times like that when you really don't know. Now, the blessing was, and a lot of people don't have this, so I was very grateful for this. I had a year left on my contract. So I had a little runway. I didn't, and maybe if I hadn't had, I would have had to jump into something else that I didn't want or didn't want to do just to provide.
Right.
But I didn't have to do that. And so then that kind of led to a whole bunch of different things that we can get into. Some failures, some
we're getting into them.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
go for it. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that's a great answer.
Okay.
Because it was a long career. And you met a lot of people, and it's an interesting career, broadcasting and sports, and it's that high level of excitement. And to your point, when you said there were only 30 positions like that, not only there are only 30 positions like that, you're the only one in this market that really has that knowledge and that intimacy with this fan base. Because speaking to Paul Allen in Seattle, Seattle's the big city and we're the little city. We're this big town and they're the city, and there's a big disconnect between broadcasting in Seattle and broadcasting in Portland. So making that jump to another NBA team, just all of that. It sounds like, and this is a long way of saying, it sounds like what you were saying is you closed a book to open another book. You didn't leave the book open to go to another chapter in the same book. It's an entirely new book.
Yeah, and that's in such a specific field. It's like, what now? I mean, literally reinvention at that point. But back to your point about the fan base and Paul, and I think what was underestimated is, I think I went through in my time there 4 or 5 presidents, 4 or 5 GMs, 4 or 5 coaches. The consistent thread between the organization and the fan base is oftentimes the broadcasters. And no matter who comes and goes, trades, injuries, firings, whatever, I still got my guys that I know who I'm hearing do the games. And because our broadcast was a little different, I think, than most, and I had stage managers on the road who I got to know really well, and they always would say, you guys are so different than anybody else doing these. And I always took that as a compliment. To some people, maybe at times, Mike was out there and a little crazy, which he was.
Which made him great, though.
It did make him great.
Like, it's Uncle Mike getting after it.
And I was always kind of the class clown guy, but with him, I'm seen as the straight guy.
Right, you're the straight guy, but you're not a straight guy, right?
No.
Like, that's,
But I kind of had to be.
Right.
And so it worked. But I think that the uniqueness of that situation was not going to be replicated. And I think, for Paul or somebody else, I think that, and for a lot of other markets too, we've seen this before. They'll make a change and not realize, man, our fan base, really that was the connective tissue between us and the organization.
Hey, to that point, I don't think Portland and Seattle are even remotely, we're nearby each other. We're vastly different.
Yeah.
And I think it's really hard for people outside to understand that. And it's kind of funny. I always looked at, Mike Rice was always to me, it's Steve Stone, Harry Carey, and the only difference is I never heard Mike pop a beer during the middle of a broadcast. I mean, obviously, but when I was young, Harry Carey, you heard it. I remember telling my dad, like, hey, he drinks a lot of soda. I was a kid. And my dad looked at me and goes, that ain't soda, kid.
No.
And so I think though that, to your point, I think Portland, Seattle, different. I still, it's interesting, Kevin Calabro, I listened to, during one of the playoff games. He's a national guy, right? You feel that he actually sounds different on a national broadcast versus when he's doing the Blazers. And I think that is where you hear kind of the difference, right? So just a comment from a average fan, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I never had the opportunity to go and do that. I had a couple of this is like 5 years before that happened. I had some minor conversations with like a TNT to do some of those. And I had some guys that did that, and they would get done with their season and then go do the national broadcast. Other than doing the NBA TV game, which they always took the home feed, then we'd be on a worldwide broadcast, which would happen on occasion, and oftentimes on the West Coast because there were not as many choices at that hour. So they would, if we were home, NBA TV would likely pick up us or Lakers or Warriors and use that broadcast. But yeah, the funny thing is now is having all this time, as far as comparing calls of games, I never really tried to be anybody else. We just kind of were what we were. And Mike, for as much as he was seen, and I've gone back and watched, not very often because I don't have many of the games anymore. I should probably take care of that. But I have on occasion, on YouTube, there'll be some games, and somebody, I think it was the NBA that put out, like this day in history, and it was our game of the Andre Miller when he scored 52 in Dallas, which was so unlikely. But I listened to that. Mike was really good. He really was good. And the way he took apart a game, and obviously as a former coach, it takes, I think this is the way it is for a lot of people. Oftentimes you have to go back. I'm very critical of myself, and I have to go back and watch sometimes and go, that wasn't bad. Good.
That was good. Yeah.
Pretty good. And not me necessarily, but Mike, and then our interaction and our relationship,
right?
Which a lot of people that always ask, the question, what's he like off the, it's exactly like he is on the air.
Yeah.
Which is the way it should be, I think.
I always wondered if he was going to pull a Pat Riley and just slide right into coaching the Blazers. I mean, he would get so passionate about a game that I thought he was going to do it.
He had his ideas on the way things should be done.
And they weren't wrong necessarily. No. I mean, I have to point that out.
He couldn't help but, and not very often did I see that come back. Like, would a coach get upset with him? Players would on occasion, especially back when he was doing radio, because the radio feed they would put on the scouting tape. So when the team would watch film, they'd hear the radio broadcast. And so when Rice would be shredding somebody, we were in Memphis one time. I remember Jeff McInnis.
Yeah.
So we're on the bus, and we went to practice, and we're on the team bus. And after practice, they had watched film. We didn't know that. Rice and I went for a walk or played tennis or something while their practice was going on. They come out, and McInnis takes Rice. Can I talk to you for a minute? Takes him behind the bus. And Rice, he said, that wasn't me. That was Barrett. That wasn't
No
He did that so many times. And then the guy wouldn't talk to me forever. And I'm like, that wasn't me. That was the analyst. So he'd always just throw me right under the bus.
That is amazing. Yeah, that wasn't me. That was Barrett.
Yeah. He did that too, I think he did that to Channing Frye. I had to explain to Channing years later, when he said that I had said that, because a lot of times, if Mike would say something, it's not the player necessarily that would get offended. It's the family, wives, moms, dads, grandmas.
Yeah, of course.
They'd hear it and not be happy. Not that we were that critical. That group, that McInnis team, now a little more on that team. In the later days, he mellowed in that way.
Channing Frye always seemed like he was a Portland guy.
Awesome.
Right? I mean,
great guy.
Good heart, I believe he lives here now.
Yeah. He married a girl from, I think, Tualatin.
Yeah. And so he's always struck me as a guy. It's always interesting, like, how is he not working, with the team? Things like that. And I recognize the Blazers right now are, who knows, whether they're going to be sold or not. It sounds like at some point they will
have to be at some point.
Yep,
it's just
exactly.
a matter of time.
And you hope a local, somebody local can buy them to bring it back to the feel of Portland. Right now you've got, it seems like Dame Lillard holding it together. You know what I mean? Other than that.
But that feeling that you're talking about,
right?
I do think this had something to do with that feeling being lost.
That was the last time it felt local.
I've had people tell me that a lot, and I love that.
And I say that not ripping on Lamar Hurd, great.
No.
Kevin Claverell, good. I say that because there's just that feeling of something missing, and I think it's at the top. And people used to say to me all the time, like, well, free agents don't want to come to Portland. I don't know that it's that. I think free agents didn't want to play for that group, the ownership group. I really do. I don't know, Paul. I don't, I'm just from an outsider looking in. It more feels like that. I was talking, I ran into an NBA player. I'm not going to name him. We were just at a bar in Portland. Funny, he was at the end of his career. He knew he wasn't going to play the next night, and he is having a few cocktails. I'm there. We strike up a conversation, and I literally said, "It sucks that we can't get free agents to come here." And he said, "It's not Portland, it's Paul Allen." And I'll never forget that. That was interesting, and I wonder how much of that is true, because you have some people that are, they're well off, and hey, I'm going to make this change. It doesn't matter. I'm going to do that. It doesn't matter, but it does matter.
Yeah,
and who knows? I mean, it'll be interesting to see which way the Blazers organization goes. I know the city of Portland could use them winning right now. We could use a little good news. I miss the days of the early 90s. You had Clyde, you had Jerome, and then the early 2000s. And before we pivot out of basketball,
because you're getting there, and I'm feeling it already.
Yeah, the 2000 Lakers. How bad? Because I know how badly I personally was destroyed over that loss. How bad was it really on the organization, in your opinion? Because that was you. You were there.
Well, and I had, so ironically at that time, I was doing some TV stuff. So I was traveling in those playoffs. But that's when we had a WNBA team, and I was the voice of the WNBA team. Right. So I was doing both. So I actually stayed home for that game, and we did we opened up the then Rose Garden, and we had a fan viewer party and half the bowl was full. I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah.
And so I was in there when that was going on, when that, and I don't know what would have changed after that, if they win that. I mean, I think they win the title if they win that game.
Yeah.
They beat Indiana, who I think it was that year. There are a lot of stories like that with this team over time. You go all the way back. I mean, you go back to Walton's injuries, you go to Sabonis not coming early, you go to Oden, you go to, Bob McInnis, LaRue Martin over Bob McInnis. Right. You can go right down the list.
It's almost harder to be the Blazers and what they've accomplished in not winning.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that is some pretty.
But despite all that, they've had a lot of success.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
but there's so many things that could have changed in all of that would have made. I mean, all the way, Bowie, Jordan, all that stuff.
But then we drafted Michael Thompson, I believe, over Larry Bird,
number one.
Right. Which at that time, the way
drafting for need, then that's why they didn't take drafting, Jordan,
right?
Because they had Clyde, and so we need a center. You got to take Bowie. Yeah. No, I mean that happened. Martell over Chris Paul. I mean, there's stories like that lined up, but I think every team has some of those. I'm not sure everyone has as many as the Blazers do.
I will say though, Chris Paul, Martell. I mean, Martell was a good player,
Martell.
And he's a great guy. He actually, my youngest son, his daughter played, YMCA, I believe it was, and so great with the kids on that team. When they're young enough, they have a co-ed team. He's a really good coach.
Yeah.
And an even
really
better,
good guy.
Just super down to earth.
Love Martell.
Yeah. And, just fabric, I think guy. But
and I think it wasn't I think that was Martell and Jarrett Jack, because they traded down to get 2 picks. Anyway, go ahead.
That's right.
I know you got my wheels turning.
Right. And it
wasn't off the old record books.
Who's the other?
Savannah's just sitting here going,
I know, poor Savannah's like,
pouring in a beer for us.
Right.
I know.
I'm like, can we get a whiskey? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, but hey, that's our history, right?
Yeah.
That's
right.
And
this is what it was. I mean, this was local, and like you said, your dad was a basketball coach. You were ingrained in the Portland Trail Blazers as a kid. You were a broadcaster. You were a sports. You were a fan, as are you as a fan, and that's why Portland was rallied behind you and around you, and Mike, because you were family. Mm-hmm. Everybody was one.
That's right.
So wait, go back though. Let's go way back. I gotta bring this up. No, not Blazers.
It's all right.
How was it calling high school games? I mean, did you still do the got it? Mm-mm. You didn't do that call?
No, I was so green. No, it was, and that was fun though. We were out at KUIK in Hillsborough and had the van. And
yay, the van.
The van, right. And it was just a little Marty unit that you'd in the parking lot, you'd find some kind of, hopefully I can get line of sight, and you'd extend this antenna and hope they'd hear you at the high school, and then you'd run cable in there and do a game. Yeah, that was cool though. We did a lot of those.
Was that early 80s?
No, that was late. That was in 90.
That was 90s.
Yeah.
That's called cutting your
early
teeth.
90s. Yeah, it was cutting teeth. It was probably 92-ish. No, 91-ish, because I got the job at KXL in 92. That would have been right 91, 92 right there. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, right before I went to high school. So,
Thank you.
I just, I don't want to age
What a
you,
time
but
that was.
I was just, wanted to point out, you look good though.
Thank you.
Well, let's talk about moving into radio and how that kind of got you
from radio to TV.
From high school calls.
Oh, yes.
And then as sports director, and then TV, because you had a lengthy career before the Trailblazers. Even Trailblazers was longest.
Yeah.
There was a route to get there.
8 years, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, that is.
I didn't honestly, and people ask that, how'd you get into this? I wish I had some answer. I mean, I look at some younger people that I know now who are just driven, and like my nephew's a pilot and gets out of high school and goes to Embry-Riddle, and now he's, got a Delta's after. I wasn't like that. I went to college and to play baseball, and that flamed out. And so I started working at Oregon State, and I was kind of around the athletic department and got to know people in the media. I knew I'd end up in sports somewhere, but I went to get a journalism degree because writing always came really easy to me, but I didn't really ever think a whole lot about the broadcasting part. And it just so happened that we had the opportunity to do some games for the campus station, TV and radio. So we just started doing it because they didn't care. And I got out from that, came up here with really not knowing what I was going to do. I was going to I thought I had a bunch of friends on the golf team. So I thought, well, you want to get in the golf business. And then the KUIK thing happened. And then it was right after that, I put together a tape, an audition tape, which I had no experience. I had no business getting that job at KXL. And I hit it off with the program director, Dennis Kelly.
And you're in.
And I'm in. I remember calling my dad, and this was like going back for a third interview. And I said, Dad, I think I might get this job. And he said, come on. I mean, he was trying to tell me.
He's trying to be supportive.
Yeah.
Yet let you know.
Because there were other guys. Because back then, KEX and KXL were the two big AMs back then who were always battling, and KEX had the Blazers and Scott Lynn, who's in Florida now, a buddy of mine. And I remember Bob Akamian was working for them, and I went to get audio. This was during the playoffs in '92 for the Blazers, and I show up at practice with a tape deck to get audio, and I remember Bob was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm the guy at KXL now." And they were all saying, "What?" And there were a couple of guys in town who had gone after that job, and they were like,
"Who?"
Yeah, they had seen me around a little bit because I was a runner for CBS and NBC. Well, CBS then, but they lost the contract. NBC got it in '91. So anyway, while I was in college, even right at the end, because of my work at the Sports Information Office at Oregon State, I had, you made a little extra money by being a runner for whatever network would be broadcasting the game. Usually in college, it was Raycom or Prime Sports Northwest to really go back. And then I got so I was on the floor as James Brown's runner when he was the sideline reporter for the '90 finals against Detroit. Amazing access at that point, and a huge fan. And then '91 happens, Blazers lose to the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. That's the year the 63 win team, they should have won the title and blew it in the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah.
The drop ball out of bounds, tough pass,
Robinson.
Cliff, Buck, yes. So in '92, then I was the runner for NBC. But anyway, I'm going all around this because I got the job in the middle of the playoffs. So I'm at KXL then. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going on the air and talking. But it always came pretty easy to me, so it wasn't that difficult. But yeah, my first assignment was covering the NBA Finals in '92, Blazers Bulls, and they put me on a plane to Chicago. So I was covering
How exciting.
Michael Jordan and the Bulls. Yeah, it was crazy. And the old Chicago Stadium,
right? Which
I'm so fortunate to have seen a game there because there's nothing like it. So anyway, I probably took you in a direction you weren't going. But yeah, that's how that all started. And then 8 years later, in '99, the Blazers were opening up they had a studio host position for radio and kind of a do everything, edit Rip City Magazine, be the editor of that magazine. And then they were talking about bringing in the WNBA. So I kind of got all that stuff when I went over there, but I got off the mornings, early mornings. Nice. And
Oh, I have a
morning
20 plus
radio.
year career
I
in
know.
broadcasting. So yes,
I know,
all of
I'm
this is very,
saying.
you guys can talk Trailblazers all day long, but you and I can talk broadcasting all day
So
and
getting
night
up
long.
at 4 in the morning
Yes.
and working a split shift, which is I did for
Yep.
8 years. I did the morning drive and evening drive, and then would go cover games. And on the weekends, I was on the Oregon Duck broadcast crew. So I mean, you talk
What year
about
was that?
it was 92 to 99.
Okay, so I was getting home at 4 in the morning. And
I was
just wanna
leaving
point that
at
out.
4 in the morning.
I was a youngster, you
But
know.
I was
old enough.
I was the Walking Dead, man. Split shift, go home, try to take a nap, and I hated taking naps because then your
Right.
body feels like you need a nap, and it was
Right.
tough. But yeah, then the Blazers came, and I said, yeah, sure. I hadn't really tried.
Sure.
I knew. Well, that's
I'll
what
be your announcer.
Well, no. But it wasn't then. It was, will you do all this? And I at that point I thought, yes, obviously, but I get off mornings. That was going to be a huge benefit. And then it was a couple of years there, and Pete Pranica, who's still the voice of the Memphis Grizzlies, was in my seat then, and they moved Pete out and put me in the chair. And that's another job I probably was not qualified for. I mean, I guess everybody can say that, but I thought at that point, not that I wasn't deserving, I guess. I just hadn't, you didn't very oftentimes in the NBA. I mean, everybody's got to get their first job, but very rare to be a hometown, homegrown fan and slip into that role.
I don't think people realize how hard that job is. I remember, I don't know if you remember that years ago, I want to say 03, it's called 2003.
I've been my first year, I think.
ESPN was doing an open audition at different cities.
Yeah.
Do you remember this?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so to be a broadcast or, to be on ESPN.
I think that's how Nate Bynum got his job.
Exactly. And so, they're going around the country. So a buddy calls me. He's like, yeah, we should try out for this.
Did you do it?
And oh yeah, because I'm young and dumb, right? And I'm like, oh, this can't be that hard. All you're doing is just, talk deeply, right? I don't know, And so it was horrible. I mean, I just sucked. I was in a suit that was way too big for me.
Yeah, but you've done some stand up and been around a microphone.
Yeah, but it's not like that. I mean, it's different. There's no crowd to laugh and help you, like, gauge your way through.
That's right? For sure. I will say that the play-by-play job, and when Jordan Kent had his opportunity, I told Jordan, when we had a lot of conversations, I love Jordan, but I said, you've got to have an overabundance of self-awareness, because you're really the setup guy. Radio, yeah, play-by-play guy is painting a picture. TV, you're just telling them stuff they're already seeing. So what you have to do then is, you're a traffic cop. You've got to get to the break, get to the feature, set up a graphic, set up your analyst, take it out of the break, get the sponsor mentions, do all the reads correctly, get the interviews done. That's really what you're doing. And then, like Steve Jones initially, who was great to work with, and Steve was on the #1 NBC team at the time. I was his partner. So he would leave on the weekends and go work with Bob Costas and Bill Walton, which is a great broadcast team.
That was some of the best broadcasting
phenomenal.
it was, right?
Yeah. And Steve was so good and so hard on me, but I loved that. It's like the coach that you had that you hated at the time, and later you went, man, gosh, I needed that. So Steve was that. I was a kid to him, which I really was anyway, but I loved him, and I grew up listening and watching him, because people don't remember, Steve Jones was on the broadcast call of the '77 title game. He had just left the league. So anyway, Steve was around forever, and it was the perfect guy for me to work with first.
Yeah.
Love it.
I always felt like, and you brought up Jordan Kent, I always felt bad. I mean, because I believe it was the bubble.
Well, the reason I brought him up is because you said not reacting to a crowd.
Right.
He never got a chance to do a game with a crowd.
Right. He goes right into the bubble.
Yeah.
I mean, poor guy. It's like, how are you ever going to?
And they didn't travel him the next year when he was working. And so you're calling games from the studio, which I did for Summer League.
That's hard.
It's called a backbench feed. You'd sit in the studio and call the game, which is what they do for the Olympics, for Formula One. People don't understand how many events are called from a studio. You think the guys are there, and they're not there. But that, for the NBA to not be able to feed off the crowd, we sat courtside. That's how I got to know all the referees, because they knew, Mike would rip them apart. I would tend to
you
tell
were the good
them,
guy.
Yeah.
Right.
And I got to be good enough friends with him where if there was a really tough call, even at home, I had the replay. They knew I had the replay. And there were, I don't know, a dozen of the referees who during the timeout would be standing at the foul line and would look at me and kind of do this. And I'd say, good call or bad call. They wanted to know. And so once you earn their trust like that, and I love those guys and I respected them all. But anyway, I was saying that because you don't get that when you're in a studio. You don't feel that. You don't, and then Terry and going back before that, Nate, Maurice, Cheeks, they would use us oftentimes. Terry especially, Nate too, but Terry especially would use me to glance over. If there was a bad call, he wanted to know, do I have a complaint? And a lot of times I'd say, yeah, you do. Or I'd say, nah, that was a good call. And he'd back off.
Right.
Some of them, if he was incensed, he would turn. And I'm trying to get the truck to give me the replay fast because I'm saying, Terry wants to know.
Right.
And then I'd say bad call, and Terry would then lose it. And Terry wouldn't lose it. He's not that kind of guy.
He would lose it in his own way.
Yeah.
Right.
And he tried to protect his player.
Sure.
But a lot of times the referees got to where they knew we were doing that, and they didn't. We were supposed to defuse the situation, and oftentimes
you all have
we'd fight a fire with gasoline,
right? And you all have had the mute button, so,
which I used a lot,
right?
on Rice's,
right? You're pushing Rice's, and he's
because he'd go to yell at a ref, which we did a lot on press row, and we're not supposed to, and he would grab his microphone without muting it first, which then you hear this muffle, so I'd have to hit his cough button before he grabbed his microphone. That happened a lot.
Didn't it happen with Kevin Durant? Wasn't there like something?
Yes,
Kevin Durant.
Was me.
Oh, was that you? Yeah, you got into it with Kevin Durant, and
only because he was
right
getting on Terry for complaining, and I hit my button, and he was right in front of us. But he was looking at the ref saying about how much Terry complains, and I hit my button and said, "You bitch more than anybody in this league, and you're going to say that to him." And he came out after the next time out, but he was cool about it. He was
it's the heat of the game. I mean, it's the heat of the moment, and that's what
Rice would yell at the opponent, the guys all the time, especially when the play came in front of us. I just have to mute his microphone first.
Why don't they? And if you haven't sat courtside, you don't realize they can hear what you're saying.
Of course they
right?
can.
And I DeMarcus Cousins. I was sitting courtside, my first game ever being courtside, and there I am. I'm all excited, like, there we go.
You got into Marcus?
I did, but I didn't mean to. I was still thinking I was sitting, back, 25 rows back, and I yelled like I normally would yell, and the look he gave me, and he's a big man, and I don't know. I mean, it wasn't that derogatory what I said, but it got the look that I'm probably going to hurt you.
Yeah.
And I ended up saying, but a very talented, whatever it was. And he laughed. And that was at that moment, I never yelled again.
I was sitting 5 rows behind the guy in the Coliseum who yelled at Vernon Maxwell during a timeout, and Mad Max came 10 rows up and punched the guy.
Whoa.
That was a different time.
Different time.
Yeah.
I think he got a couple games and he got fined, but nothing like what happened today.
Well, I think what people don't know is how funny you actually are. I mean,
I thought I was a straight guy.
Yeah, right. That is amazing to me that you were the straight guy to Mike Rice, because you're hilarious, but yet, that shows you.
I'm a smart ass is what I am.
Right.
And so is my daughter, by the way, and I hear about that.
I want to go back to those games now, because I mean, how many times were you messing with people, right? You're throwing out little words and people are like, I wonder if he meant,
I used to have friends one friend in particular, who would text me a word of the game, and I had to get that word in. And sometimes it was something that did not fit with basketball. So my challenge was, sometimes it was a movie quote. Sometimes it was a character from a movie.
Was it a Diablo sandwich quote?
Yeah, something like that. That's why I season that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It was something like that where I had to work that into the broadcast, and I could always work it in somewhere. But I mean, when you're especially in my early days when we weren't very good, you go on a 7-game road trip and you're down 20 in the first quarter of game 1, you got no shot to win any of those games. That's when you've got to have stuff ready. You got to have content, and that's what I started with. I look at guys who walk in with a great team. Anybody can call a really good game between 2 great teams. It's very easy. Go call a game on a Tuesday night at Philly when both teams stink and you're going to get beat by 30.
Right.
And you got a week of that coming up on the road, which is what we had back then.
what we had this year.
Oh yeah, I didn't watch.
Yeah,
but, that's where you have to really do a lot of work, and I did a lot of prep, and I would spend 4 or 5 hours on my game cards every game, and because my fear was the guy who's 12th on the bench, he'll get in and have a career night, or he'll get an opportunity, or he'll get hurt. I got to know him, and I got to know what he's about, and I got to know his mom and dad, and I got to know his story, where he went to school. And so that was and I think this is probably not totally unique. So therefore, fear was my motivator, which is not really good, but in my case, it was fear of not performing. And everybody would know if I didn't prepare. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like it was a little thing. Everybody would know it if I didn't know something. You can't fake that. So therefore, I was not going to be outworked, and I was not going to have anybody else who knew more at their, back in the day, it was just hand printed game notes. You just had to go through them. And there was some internet, obviously, but not like now. Now you could sit during the game and Google and figure it out. Back then, it wasn't necessarily that way. So that was a good training ground for me to really find out what motivated me, and then use that to do the work, and then to have a team that wasn't very good, because you had to talk about a lot and try to keep viewers,
Absolutely.
Which I think we did in the end, and that was the biggest compliment I got. And there were a few, but biggest one I remember was even in my last couple of years, we went to Philadelphia against I don't know why I'm picking on Philly. They were really, really bad, and we were getting hammered and shouldn't have, but we had a blast on the air. We were storytelling. We were talking about different things, and got off on restaurants, and because kind of what you have to do. And I had a couple people say, "There's no reason why I should have listened to that game and stayed watching it," but I did because it was really good TV.
About all this stuff,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
and having the ability and having a partner that you knew well enough and trusted to do that, to go off the road, that was really cool, and I appreciated him for that.
So, a question from Eric, our producer.
Yes.
Top 3 Blazer moments, and we're going to probably leave you with this, but what are your top 3, Blazer moments that you called?
Some would be predictable. Some may not be. He already mentioned the one that I think one of the best was the Batum lob game winner against San Antonio at home. But what people don't know when they watch that highlight is what had to happen to get back in that game. I think they were down 7. I think, if memory serves, like a minute left. It was a Matthews steal. It was Ginobili came down, handling the ball loose, and I was able to. That was one of those good things where I was able to, and I didn't pride myself on this, but I said on the air, the way Ginobili's dribbling that ball out in front, Matthews is going to steal that, and he did.
And he did.
A second later. And it's funny. I start remembering all that stuff. So that was one of them. And then we had sometimes, if we had a game the next night somewhere, we would leave that night. That was one of those games where as soon as the game was over, we were in our cars to the airport and gone. So that was a fun one to be able to talk about on the way to the next city, which I don't know where we were going, Utah or somewhere. There are a couple moments that weren't necessarily fantastic finishes, but moments I remember. The winning streak of the team, and I think 07 was
Outlaw.
13 in a row.
Yeah, Travis Outlaw
started
hit that game winner
at Memphis.
Yep.
That team that had no business going on a winning streak went on a winning streak. And the night that winning streak ended, which I think, again, was in Utah, and we were flying to Minnesota, it was New Year's Eve.
4 seconds, 3 seconds. Kleza for 3. Outlaw blocks it, and the winning streak is at 10. A block shot by Roy and a block shot by Outlaw.
And Sergio Rodriguez and Rudy Fernandez, some of these guys I really loved and knew well, they had a party on the way, which there was no drinking on the plane. You never did that. This was New Year's Eve. This was different
and they're Euros.
Yeah.
So they're drinking.
I walked into that players area, and they were, to watch these young guys, that was one of my most memorable moments. And it was cool because they had lost, but they had accomplished something. We weren't going to the playoffs, but that was a really remarkable streak for a team that didn't have any business doing that. And then probably, yes, Dame's game winner against Houston was incredible. That was 14? The shot over Parsons. That was very memorable. I felt like we blew the call, therefore I don't remember it with as much.
Because you were just screaming at that point.
Rice went after the officials on the air after, and I didn't want him to. He went after Mike Callahan because of the play earlier when Dwight Howard pushed, I don't even know who it was, out of bounds. And I was trying to cover so that he wouldn't. So I ended up talking too much when I wanted to let him moment. So anyway, that's how I am though. I don't remember that one as one of the great ones because I was so pissed at the way we called it. And I know people wouldn't probably necessarily feel that way, but I did. And then there were, gosh, I can sit here and start ticking off these wins. And some of them, I mean, we won like 5 straight in Toronto in that Sunday morning game where Toronto's a hockey, it's all hockey up there, but they're early morning Sunday game, early morning here, not there. We got that game like 5 years in a row, and we won 3 or 4 of them when we shouldn't have. Those were huge wins. The Brandon Roy times I remember really, really well when he had his huge games. The game against Dallas, Game 6.
That was his farewell, basically.
It was his farewell. It was the last time he ever really, and comes in and has the fourth quarter he had.
And what's amazing, we all talk about Odin, but we never talk about Roy's knees.
No.
And how that actually, I mean.
Because he was able to play long enough to have a legacy.
Right.
Even though it wasn't what it should have been.
Right.
And people say, why'd you take him? You knew he had knee trouble. He saved the franchise. People don't understand how much he saved the franchise.
Wasn't there a point we were going to go to
Yes.
Kansas City, right?
Yes.
Portland,
that's more real than people know.
Right. Trailblazers were on their way to Kansas City.
And San Diego was in the mix too, but that team, because bankruptcy had been declared, the arena war was on. And I remember being with an executive who I won't mention at breakfast in Memphis. No, in Oklahoma City. We were in OKC. I don't know why, because I remember this crappy little restaurant we used to go to. And he told me that is real. This is real. I mean, this was happening. And it was that group led by Brandon and his charisma that saved that franchise. I'm telling you, he did.
Yeah. It's pretty good that the fans, didn't realize.
They didn't know everything then. Now they probably would. It would be harder to keep that a secret, but I loved him and loved my time. And the night that they honored me,
that was nice.
It was actually right as the pandemic, right before, like weeks before. They had me, Damon Stoudemire, Travis Outlaw, and Brandon was supposed to be there that night when we all got announced, and he couldn't make it down for some reason. And I was really bummed because I really wanted to see him again.
Well, I mean, we should be probably retiring. Not we. I'm not with the Blazers, but the Blazers should be retiring his number. Right. I mean,
I think so.
And
I know that they retired a whole bunch after the title, and they got criticized for how many they retired. But he belongs up there.
Yeah.
He really does.
Yeah.
Thank you, as always, for checking out DMG's Bootstraps and Business. If you'd like to find out more about our guests, DMG, or these podcasts, just check out the show notes. Thank you.